Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. Our podcast is brought to you by the University of Hong Kong's RegTech Lab, the HKU SEF FinTech Academy, the Asia Global Institute, and the HKU edX Professional Certificate in FinTech, as well as support from the university's Faculty of Law. I'm your host, Ajay Shamdasani. In our initial spotlight segment today, we'll be having a chat with risk management specialist and former Royal Hong Kong Police Force alumnus Steve Vickers about political risk across the Asia-Pacific region. Following that, we'll have a discussion with Dubai-based Mark Nuttall on his career in law enforcement and how he learned worthwhile lessons that can be applied to the compliance profession. But first, the ongoing U.S.-China trade war has seen a brief respite, with U.S. President Donald Trump announcing a 90-day grace period in mid-May. But much uncertainty remains. Recent military action by India against terrorist camps in neighboring Pakistan, Yemeni attacks against foreign vessels in the Gulf of Aden as a show of solidarity with the Palestinian cause, and Israel's pursuit against Hamas terrorists in Gaza and the ensuing collateral damage as measured by the lives of thousands of civilians, coupled with a seemingly unending Russia-Ukraine war. These are all clear markers that our world is a perilous and conflict-ridden place. The peace dividend that many of us expected at the end of the Cold War simply hasn't materialized. 9/11 gave us a rude awakening to realize that. But that's the macro level. What about our region right now? Steve Vickers can shed some light on that. He's the founder and CEO of Steve Vickers and Associates, a specialist risk and security consultancy with a presence in Hong Kong, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, and London. An expert at resolving kidnapping and product extortion cases, he additionally draws upon unrivaled networks of contacts and information sources in spearheading a wide range of business risk and mitigation services. Steve was a 18-year veteran with the Royal Hong Kong Police Force and commanded its Criminal Intelligence Bureau. His duties included operational command of the Intelligence Bureau and its covert resources, tactical and strategic operations against triad and organized crime groups in the territory, risk assessments and operational control of declared kidnapping incidents and product contamination issues. And with that, Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So with all that's going on, as an analyst, as someone who looks at the big picture, what do you see as the emerging geopolitical risks for the Asia-Pacific region?
I see the risk outlook in Asia 2025. I think it's worsened markedly. I'm not just pressing U.S. President Trump. His policies will, whether we like it or not, fundamentally change the regional economic and security structure. That's not just down to Trump. It's down to many other things, but it's live and it's happening now. I think economic pressures will rise, and the security system, which has held Asia together for many years, is going to come under great strain. Separating out economic and security concerns as being is almost close to impossible. So there's going to be winners and losers. It's not all negative. But those companies or individuals or large organizations that can be deft and flexible will get there. There's a Chinese expression, "ngai gei," which means opportunity and danger. I've never seen anything more present than at the moment. I think there's a political shift in how people see the world. So both parties, the US and China, are seeking to develop their own hinterlands or areas of control. And the U.S. treatment of long-term allies will determine whether these blocs actually develop. Trump has brought a fundamentally different approach to regional policy, which will have major consequences for businesses operating in the region. And these policies and the reactions and counter-reactions from the Chinese side will bring wrenching changes across the Asia-Pacific region, and it will buffet both economic and security. Trump's doctrine, I think, is as yet unclear. If there is one, I think there is some thought behind it. but early indications seem to be that he believes in a concentric circle approach, being, if you could imagine the world, North America as a core, the priority in security and economic terms, at least from his point of view. Then the system of allies, with Trump seemingly desiring to scale back obligations, specifically in Europe. Thirdly is an apparent willingness to establish these spheres of interest agreement with great powers such as China, Russia, and others. And the prevailing theme is that of perceived American weakness and of a need to retreat from what one could describe as imperial responsibilities. The policy is much clearer when you look at Europe. China is seen by consensus in the US by both sides of the aisle as being a major competitor. So what the US is up to now could be perceived by some as being a retreat from empire. Trade ties previously encouraged Beijing not to act directly on Taiwan or on South China Sea for fear of unsettling commerce. That constraint is arguably not so strongly in place now, meaning that risks of a conflict have risen. A concern is that increasingly untethered bilateral relationships can result in broader hostility between great powers, and again result in proxy conflicts over hostilities and even outbreaks of tensions. Most states in Asia, most other states other than China, want to hedge against or not be drawn into a Cold War style decision. I'm with them or I'm not with them. This spheres of influence approach, it will not be attractive to almost anyone. The withdrawal of the US from parts of the region leaves some states with little autonomy with regard to Chinese power. High tariffs in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Indonesia could certainly encourage those in other states to tilt far toward China, notwithstanding their own individual historical security concerns. And the risks for contests for influence are really real. The South Korean example outlines how sudden domestic ruction can have international consequences. And this spheres of interest plan, I mean, if any of you have read the book 1984 by George Orwell, there were three big spheres of control: Eurasia, East Asia, and Oceania, with the UK being airstrip one off the coast of Oceania. It sounds incredible, but to a certain extent, this spheres of interest approach appears to be being approached. This is not good. The US is traditionally has a maritime tradition. Maybe very quickly we'll zoom on to what does this mean in the economic picture before we get to securities. A major economic slowdown in China has already resulted in a very steep fall in property prices, internal consumption, in part as demographic shifts advances. That slowdown may worsen and is affecting many in the region, albeit that China seems keen now to go to reactivate that. The security contest between US and China, I think, will undermine regional stability and raise all sorts of uncertainty, including shipping, insurance, aviation, and the rest. Under the economic picture umbrella again, China's exposure is really rather significant. China's diversified away from the US since 2020, but the US trade is still about 15% of GDP. Far lower than Japan in the 1980s, when it was 40%, for example. China is still the dominant manufacturer in the world, with more than 30% of manufacturing capacity. China may well benefit by remaining reliable for partners as the US shifts its stance or becomes more understandable. China is also able to respond better than in 2020, including by investigating Google, for example, putting companies on unreliable entity lists or cutting rare earth. Currency issues are in play. China has a lot of depth, and a lot of the statistics in the West we see about China really are the major East Coast cities, but in fact the third tier cities are quite significant. China's made rapid progress in technology. DeepSeek and government support for private sectors hint at possible improvements to follow. Chinese authorities have a great capacity to handle more pain than the West if it really comes down to the wire in a trade war. As such, China may be able to outlast the US in any major trade conflict. It's unclear, but it's certainly not as simple as build. I mean, a key risk going forward would be if China seeks to dump products elsewhere, particularly in Southeast Asia. Many Asian states have built long-term infrastructure, such as ports and railways, on the assumption that the export-led model will allow them to trade their way out of poverty. So they would not be delighted if that occurs. The economic models of many states are now in question because of this trade disagreement. What's coming next will probably be major disruption and reshaping of supply chains, departure from market integration, a regulatory patchwork which is really rather hard to negotiate, and hopefully not, but it is possible, a descent into tit-for-tat protectionism. So all of this is not so good from the economic point of view. So from the economic point of view, a lot remains to be seen. It's still very unstable, and until it becomes very clear. Quickly onto security issues, which is key. The US hub and spoke alliance system, which had evolved over 50 years, is out the window, and they have a new system now called the lattice structure, which is supplemented by separate alliances, for example, between the US, Japan, India, and Australia and the UK. Questions about US commitment to protecting various countries in Asia have arisen. Historically, that system had survived Trump's first term, but pressures are resurfacing. A key issue will be how pressure plays domestically. States such as South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, particularly South Korea and Japan, may consider whether they need to acquire nuclear weapons, given doubts as to the US security guarantee. And the three big potential areas for flashpoints are very obviously the Taiwan Strait, Taiwan itself, the South China Sea, and more recently the Korean Peninsula. What is now clear is that developments in these hitherto separate theaters have become increasingly interlinked. Obviously, Taiwan is the core regional security issue and is of critical importance to the mainland and may not be fully understood at the US, and just how strong or how deep this means to the Chinese. Within Taiwan, TSMC is under pressure from Trump to reinvest or to invest in Intel or to construct semiconductors in the US. Taiwan will fear or lose any loss of its Silicon Shield. China continues to expand very significantly its military capacity with landing vessels, missile deployments, etc. China is maintaining very effective gray zone measures around Taiwan. Taiwan cables come ashore in only 4 main locations and all are very deeply vulnerable. So the Taiwan issue remains very large and very, very worrying. The South China Sea, deployment of US missiles in northern Philippines to cover the Bashi Channel south of Taiwan, it will worry the Chinese parties. Rotation of US Marines and strong Japanese support for the Philippines have all kicked off in the last few years. So there's a serious risk of some form of escalation moving quickly into a maritime or larger incident. Hence my discussion of the mentioning of the South China Sea.
Okay, I mean, you've given a good articulation of the threat landscape, but if you were to distill it down to what does it mean then for the corporates and banking and financial institutions that inhabit places like Hong Kong and Singapore?
I think people need to be prepared but not panicked. I mean, Hong Kong, if it comes to the wire, Hong Kong is a part of mainland China. So Hong Kong's position is clear. Japan is where Japan is, it remains a strong ally of the United States. South Korea will be somewhat untethered as a consequence of the change of government and instability. I mean, the most likely problem right here and right now, would be an ugly incident in the South China Sea. That's quite a likely issue. It's unlikely, however, to materially damage that. I think what airlines, shipping companies, and those operating cross regionally would need to be alive to would
Because
be
that has implications for insurance as well.
what I'm talking about, precisely that. Declaration of, I mean, Lloyd's of London, who would declare a war zone or whatever, always pumps up the premiums very rapidly. I'm not saying it's that bad. The most likely one in the current scenario is some ugly incident in the South China Sea. From China's point of view, China has wide claims, nine dash claims across the South China Sea. The Philippines has taken them to court and won. If there is to be, the Chinese probably fear the opposite of the domino theory, which is they let one state get away with resisting them over this, then another might follow. So Indonesia might follow, or Vietnam might follow. Taiwan is a different issue, one of huge substance, and that really would change things. But from a corporate point of view, working cross region, one would have to allow for additional insurance costs, disruption to supply chains, and other difficulties. But this is plannable. I've done a lot of work with large corporations operating across the region, and many corporations have plans in place for that. So they're the bigger issues, but there are other ones. There's a tendency to see Chinese-U.S. strategic issues as of being of most note, which is true. But there are other risks. Southeast Asia provides some illustrations of under the radar risks. For example, today in the region, Thailand, Paetongtarn Shinawatra, the daughter of Thaksin Shinawatra, continues in a very head-on battle with the Thai elite. That could change, or the wheel could come off the wagon on that quite quickly. In Indonesia, President Prabowo's government certainly has authoritarian inclinations and is quite unpredictable. Then the influence of China-U.S. contests and other states is interesting. And the Chinese military may support Myanmar, which again could provoke other difficulties. And then there are vulnerabilities of states if their financial situation radically worsens. Vietnam's sudden loss of export income can certainly threaten economic stability. So they're the sort of wider risks. But I think in the end, we need to monitor what is occurring. There's a whole series of things that could be done, but I think we probably don't have enough time today to run through those.
Well, you've given us a lot to digest, and clearly it's a moving picture, an evolving landscape. Steve Vickers, thank you so much for your time.
You're most welcome. God bless. Bye-bye.
For the second part of today's broadcast, we'll be speaking with a returning guest to this program. That is Mark Nuttall in Dubai. He's going to be sharing with us the lessons he learned during his career in law enforcement with the London Metropolitan Police and how some of it also applies to the world of compliance. These days, he's gone on to bigger, better, more exciting things like being an executive and geopolitical advisor and strategic deal facilitator for a great number of family offices in the Middle East and Asia. He possesses over 25 years of experience in strategic leadership, risk management, and business development, having held roles again at the Metropolitan Police Service, Thomson Reuters, Interpol, and Hill & Associates. Mark also founded the Faustus Consultancy in the Iron Club. He offers his executive advisory services working across the Asia-Pacific, MENA, and Europe to drive growth, optimize operations, facilitate deals, and enhance governance. In terms of subject matter expertise, he's delivered advisory services on governance, compliance, risk reduction, finance, leadership, geopolitics, anti-money laundering, resilient security, and ESG. And with that, Mark, thank you so much for coming back.
Thanks very much, AJ. That was a rather long list, wasn't it? But that's what happens when you sum up over 30 years of work experience, I suppose.
What was it that drove you to become a police officer? Was it just a need for a job that looked exciting when you were younger, good benefits? You get to play with guns and gadgets, or were you driven by a need, as some say, to serve a greater cause?
It was a whole range. It's a complex thing is becoming a police officer, and I come from a background, as we discussed previously, that was a lot of my friends and a lot of the people that I grew up with. If they would never have entertained that I was going to become a police officer. It was, my early career.
The force takes all sorts.
It does, yeah. So I've always been relatively a colourful character, I think some people would say. But the initial part, my early career was made up of everything, from manufacturing roles to a small period in the armed forces to security. I've always been, in some way, shape, or form, a security practitioner, and then obviously a security leader in due course. From a very early age, I used to do nightclub bouncing from the age of kind of 14, 15 upwards. It was crazy. But I grew up in a very rough, like you said at the start of this, a very rough and tumble town in the north of England called Burnley in Lancashire. It's a traditional mill town. It was very rough and tumble. So the kind of nights are made up of fighting, drinking, and just being a general idiot. From very early ages, and what I've always had kind of an innate sense of wanting to, look after people. From a very early age. I've got a younger brother, so maybe that's it. I don't know. But the innate sense of wanting to make sure that people aren't taken advantage of, that people are looked after, that they're not put into situations where they're bullied or frightened, or I always get a deep longing sense of wanting to look after people and make sure that they're okay, and make sure that they're welcomed into whatever circumstance that they may be in at the time, and that their circumstances can always improve. And there's always positivity in life, no matter the situations that you're placed into. There's always a compelling want and desire in a lot of people, even though they don't realize it at the time, to want to move on to what is acknowledged, in common dictum these days, it's kind of evolving to the next stage of your life process, whether that be learning, education, whether it be a new job, whether it be just buying a nice shirt, or to have a good meal, or to then move countries, or whatever the case might be. And for me, I moved down to London, and throughout that period, I was jumping from security roles, bouncing on nightclub doors, which, let me tell you, in London is not an easy feat. And you get to know quite a few characters, again, very colourful. From to working in, supermarkets and things like that. Anything I do. But during that period, as I've spoken to you about previously, I unfortunately became homeless because I couldn't afford anywhere to live. Now, I see myself, and I'll put a very nice word in around it, but a bit...
Very easy to burn through your savings in London, let me say.
But yeah, it is, yeah. I like to phrase myself as a transient migratory worker. I think that's what they call them in other countries, aren't they? And as a... Yeah, let's put some better verbiage around it. So, yeah, essentially what I was doing is I was working, but then sleeping rough, both days and nights as well, because I was working some nights, some days. And then my girlfriend, as it was at the time, became pregnant with our first child. So I was sending the money up, any money that I was earning, up to her to make sure that she was living and surviving and the child was as well. So that was part of the reason of why I couldn't afford to kind of get anywhere, live anywhere. And things were different back then anyway, because there was no or very little internet at the time to be able to utilize back then. Everything worked on the, I think it was Loop magazine and a number of others. But I won't go into all that. I bore you to tears. But why did I become a police officer? I became a police officer because at the time it was being sold as a excellent job, fantastic benefits. You got to help people. You got to contribute to society. And the law enforcement thing, as strange as it may sound, wasn't the biggest driver for me. It was, as per my entire kind of life pathway had been set out, it was to assist, to help, to contribute to people. And having lived a fairly, like I say, colourful life up to that point, it became very clear to me that that's what I should be doing. Now, throughout my career in police service, that kind of dictum changed the longer that I was I've always had a very inquisitive mind anyway. And as a result of that, I then lent myself to investigation, opening up people's lives, what they were doing, how they were doing it, for what purpose. And even throughout that, even when I was investigating people, I'd still want to assist them in a way. Even when I was interviewing people, the reason why I was quite a good detective is because I could speak to them. I could speak to them. I wasn't facing off with them. I wasn't having an argument with them. I wasn't, nefarious in any way with them. I was just having a simple discussion and trying to see what they'd done, no matter whether it was murder, organized crime, shoplifting, theft, burglary, robbery, you name it. I dealt with the vast majority of every crime you could think of in central London because of the volume, scale, and the types of crimes that occur. It didn't matter to me. It was about I am going to have a conversation with this person, no matter how many no comments they give. I want to know about them. I want to know about their lives. I want to know about what drove them to do whatever it is that they're alleged to have done. And I'm a very evidence-based individual as well. Let's have a look at the evidence. Let's see what that looks like. Let's see how it's affecting the community. And the longer I carried on down that path as well of being an accomplished detective, of being able to, lead teams, the forensic parts of it, the budgeting, everything that you do as you grow within a career pathway. The further I went up the technical ladder, if you will, the further away from that assisting people and helping people and being part of the community, I veered away from. That was one of the reasons why I opened a gymnasium as well towards the latter end of my career. It wasn't to make money. It was to assist people that couldn't afford. It was like a community gym, like a family. And it was getting back to understanding who people were for what purpose. I forgot about what London was, what a throbbing heartbeat it is, or certainly was at that time. Who was in it, for what purpose? Because when you're a police officer, all you ever see is the bad. You're only ever at somebody's party when they've been shot or stabbed or there's been a sudden death or whatever. You're never with them in the good times. Okay? So when people...
Such is the nature of the role, right?
Yeah, when people say they don't like police officers, AJ, it's typically because we pitch up, we are there at their very worst. Their very worst moments, whether it's the police officer placing them in a pair of handcuffs or delivering a death message or being sat with them at the side of the road as their internal organs are falling out of them. There is a whole load of dimensions to being it, but the vast majority of the time it's being there at their worst hour.
Well,
and policing in the UK...
People don't consult doctors and lawyers because they want to.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the situations with being a police officer in the UK as well. It's a community based process. It's policing by consent in the UK, and it's a different type of policing. A lot of police officers throughout the world are solely law enforcement officers. That is their role. That is their job. It's to enforce legal dictum, and so they go, they do their relevant task, and away they go again. Police officers in the UK, unlike many I've seen, I was in Interpol for a number of years. Aside from the countries that are still technically utilising the legislation in the United Kingdom, and that kind of policing-based approach, a lot of them have veered into semi-quasi-military, or they are, law enforcement, or they're prosecution-based, so they're asked an action by a prosecutor, etc. And in the UK as well, there's the use of discretion, and that police officers, justification, suspicion, causality, reasonable doubt, etc. And a whole range of things that you can make the decision, and you can form that investigation pathway. There's so much flexibility to being a police officer in the UK, as well as all that legislative. The legislation in place so very strong, and if you wanted to use that legislation, it is there in full to be able to use it. It's unlike many other countries.
It sounds like you've learned rather a great deal. I mean, you've seen life from both sides of the law, it sounds like, and I do believe a man's attitude to a large extent determines the direction of their lives, and then character is destiny, as the ancient Greeks would say. But coming back to your innate desire to be a protector, I guess my question is two-pronged. In terms of the lessons that you learned as a police officer and as a detective, which lessons do you still find yourself applying today, given the nature of what you do? And what lessons do you feel you learned during your time on the force that could be applied to the world of compliance? Because you were with Thomson Reuters around about the same time I was, and clearly compliance was what they made a name for themselves in when no one else was focusing in it. Though obviously things changed, and now the market is rather saturated, and with such service, they've got way more competition.
I probably say, out of everything within the police service, it's documentation, clear English, pragmatism, making sure that what you do with pride and determination as well. Is that if you are, being a law enforcement officer, a police officer, or whatever term you want to use within the UK, comes with having like a workman's toolkit for an entire factory at your disposal, and being very clear and determined how you utilize that those tools, and being discretionary in how you use them as well. Because as a police officer, you change people's lives in an instant. Your decision to not arrest somebody, will determine their outlook in life, and also what they can do. A simple arrest for somebody can cause the fracturing of their lives. It can completely dissolve what they're doing at that moment. So,
and sometimes it may be necessary for them to straighten out, right?
Sometimes, but sometimes, say you've got, I don't know, an individual in a university that is currently learning medicine and wants to benefit society, but then on a Saturday night they decide to go down to the Ministry of Sound, which is a nightclub in the United Kingdom, and pop an E, or pop an ecstasy tablet, or to smoke some cannabis or whatever. and they've still got those items upon them. Do you use your discretion as a police officer to seize those items, to then place them into a cabinet so that nobody can give that individual a warning and telling off and told not to, do those things again? Or do you arrest that individual?
That's a hard pull, a very human story.
Exactly, but a very common one at the same time. And so does the officer that doesn't use the discretion then arrest that individual? That individual can no longer go on to be a doctor because they've got a criminal record, or get sanctioned or put up against the board, or whatever the case might be. His education process falls to pieces, and then they end up on the dole or going back to mummy and daddies or whatever. Or does that individual, is that police officer then capable to be able to utilise his discretionary process and allow that individual to go on and lead a life to save many other lives, etc.? And that's the tack that I always took as a police officer. It's to use your discretion, use your mind, use your brain to be able to see the fracturing points into the future of how you're going about your business and doing what you do. And it can be the same within the compliance field, most certainly. Those guys, and when I came out of the police service, one of the first contracts that I did was for a regional bank, or a national bank, should I say, up in the north of England. And when I went up to do that contract, I was also in the second line of defence function. So I understand the discretion, the way that those kind of staff that are in that particular role, within, whether it be a dedicated nominated officer's role or a nominated officer's role, can do to be able to satisfy their own very low bar, and suspicion is a very low bar, to either submit to the suspicious activity report or not, or to get that individual's bank account frozen or not, or to let that individual go on doing business as they will. It's up to their investigative pathway to do that, and it's having the common sense to do it within the framework and the policies and procedures that have been made within that certain institution. Now, those nominated officers, or nominated officer, or the compliance team, or the individuals that are reviewing suspicious activity, they've always got the opportunity and the option to go and speak to the policy unit at any point to say, this is onerous, this is not onerous, this is too much or too little, to be able to go and have a meeting with those guys and put their points across. And what I always found as a police officer, I would always get involved. I was always get engaged. Throughout my career, I've done things like I was a certified and officiated drugs expert witness, control expert witness. So trafficking of drugs, the valuation of them, how they were used, how they were manufactured, for what purpose. The valuation being a big part of that, which is how I kind of got into having an extra toolkit in my box of powers, which was financial investigation. I had additional POCA powers, so more restrictive pieces of legislation that I had. So I was I was accredited financial investigator under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002. Part 3 powers. So I had powers to be able to write restraint statements, to get confiscations done, confiscation statements as well, and all of that, as well as my traditional toolbox of being a law enforcement officer, running big operations, both covert and overt, to investigate everything under the sun, essentially, and to kind of look at all those tools and additional tools and legislative protocol. And it's the same in any role, especially within compliance. You've got the ability to use your mind, to be able to speak up, to be able to be pragmatic about things. It's there to be, the suspicious activity reports are exactly that. Spoke to various professionals, organisations, and spoke at conferences in relation to this. Suspicion, it's a very low bar. It's up to you how you determine that to be. And compliance officers are wholly that within financial institutions, whether compliance officers, whether, dedicated officers, whether working on the tip. It's about utilizing your mind to make those human-centric decisions about that particular action that is in front of you at the time. Now, that action might be somebody coming and placing, 100,000 worth of cash into a bank. Now, if that individual is from a different country, for example, they're very limited time within the United Kingdom. In a lot of countries, using cash is still king in a lot of countries. £100,000 worth of that cash and equivalent currency is not that much in a lot of countries to place into a financial institution over the counter. But even if you place £100 in the UK, you often get flagged these days, just due to the cultural recognition. So it's all about education. It's all about pragmatism and utilizing your brain to be able to understand, different facets of what's going on, to have that human, that compulsion to be able to do identification on what's going on, what's happening.
I want to come back to what you said about your innate desire to be a protector. I mean, I'm curious, what toll did seeing people at their worst and or most vulnerable and wicked have on you? I mean, you no doubt saw some of that in the military, but what was it like being a cop? I mean, you hinted at some of that. I don't know how much you'd care to share,
but I've seen things as a civilian. Seen things as when
the worst of humanity. And many young cops, they start out as idealistic and they become jaded.
And you can become jaded, but again, for me, it's all about assisting and to understand the individual, whether it be in front of you at a table in an interview room, while you're searching their house, while you're dealing with their dead grandmother, when you're arresting them for murder. I've arrested people for murder. I've been in the presence of where people are dying, after being stabbed, knifed, some people's heads blown off. Or there's a whole. I won't go into that, but there's a whole menagerie of things that you deal with, and I'll say deal with because you deal with it and then you move on.
So even cops have post-traumatic stress disorder?
I'd say that what I do is I deal with things, I get on with them. Like I say, I'm very pragmatic about it. It happens, we're human beings, and then I move on. And then one day, maybe on my deathbed, I might do a little bit of a squeal and pass away. Perhaps that's the way both my innate sense of humanity inside me and the associated many trainings that I've had and the experiences that I've had over time have enabled me to be able to
just get on with it, move in one direction forward.
But get on with it, I think is the optimal phrase. Is just get on with it and move on. That matter's been dealt with. Let's move on from it. Okay. And that's kind of the best analogy that I can kind of give, is that, there's many people that are going about their daily business, say in central London now, that are from Syria and from other war-torn countries. They are getting on with their lives. They've gone through a journey of hell, and hopefully not back, but a journey of hell itself, and then have managed to get through at the other end. No matter what, those individuals in other countries say about them once they arrive, they've managed to get there, get through that journey. And then they've managed to see that what they need to do now is survive, the next part of their journey. And what they do is put it, as I've stated a moment ago, to the back. They'll deal with it at some point, but they've got to get on and deal with it, deal with what they've got directly in front of them at the moment. They've got to ensure that they're wives, loved ones, if they've still got them, if they're still around, if they've survived the journey. Their children, partners, extended family, etc., are cared for, and to make sure that they can get on with it. It's only, I will put it this way, it's only when you've got the time to sit down that things start to come to the fore. Maybe that's why I keep myself so busy. It is that keeping busy, making sure that there's always something to do, making that I'm always on top of things, keeps me from, delving into deep and distant memories, or to memories that were newly formed, whatever. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's maybe that's the way not to spend money on therapy, is that just get on with things. I'd say something.
And compartmentalization, which men are
It is.
known for being, I think, better at, and then
Yeah.
particularly in your line of work, compartmentalization is something you intuitively learn. I'm going to put it in this box, and maybe I'll attend to it. Maybe I'll get back to it someday. But I want to come back to what you were saying, that you wanted to have a conversation sometimes with these people to help them out.
Yeah. Correct.
And I was struck by, a recent episode of the show on Netflix, Your Friends and Neighbors. The lead character is John Hamm of Mad Men fame, and he was in the hospital. I won't ruin it for people, but he was caught up in something he shouldn't be. The investigating cop said to him, I'm basically, I'm paraphrasing it, I'm pretty good at reading people, and I could see you're in a downward spiral in your life. And because he was a former hedge fund manager who, to keep up with his expenses, divorce, what have you, was robbing his friends in the neighborhood, stealing their watches, what have you. But finally got caught up in something really big, and someone ends up dying. And it wasn't him, but she says to him, I see you're going in a downward spiral. I'm not quite sure what. I'm offering you an out. Level with me. Just tell me how I can help you, because I fear at some point you're going to cross the line, and then I won't be able to help you, and then I'll have to do my job and take you down. And then he dismisses her offer, and then I can't help but envisage you in a similar situation at some point.
Yeah, definitely. I've had various individuals that I've had to place through the processing system, not because they were horrible people, but because they got themselves wrapped up into things that were too serious as well, not to deal with. And I've had individuals who've led organised crime groups, real organised crime groups, multi-millionaires, whose downfall has then occurred through, I don't know, lapsing protocols or whatever it might be. And in general, a lot of these people are akin to, they're extremely intelligent to start with. They've been through a lot of the things that, a lot of the guys will start off at the bottom of the rung anyway. So they've experienced the harder side of life, and as a result, there's a lot of process in there that you've got where these individuals could, on the other end of it, be fruitful people. And I've placed people through the process, arrested them, done full investigations into the background, known everything about, from the shoe size up to what they eat for the dinner. And you can sit there with them, and they will lend you their respect as well, because you've managed to do things that they thought couldn't be done, in terms of assessing who they are, identifying who they are, going through all the different material and evidence. Like I said, I'm a very evidence-based guy. Going through the evidence, putting that to them, and there's people that have come out of the other side after serving a 10 to 15 year stretch after I placed them in the process, but it always remained very friendly, very respectable, very professional. And on the other side of it, when they've come out, they've reached out and said, "Mark, we've got nothing but respect for you," and we would have either been dead by now or still doing what we're doing, and we've come out of the other end of this. So in a way, not thanks, we didn't want to go to prison. We didn't want all their assets taken away, etc. But it's enabled them then to review their lives. Now, coming back to the original scenario that you had, yes, of course, I've been in situations where somebody's got involved in something that's not serious, that you've utilised your discretion to be able to have a conversation with them. They're very rarely, they're not individuals that are causing acute problems for society. It's just for themselves that they're causing problems. And of course, you can have that discussion with them and seek to place them upon the right path. Now, fool me once, fool me twice and all of that. If you do it again, then obviously what I'm going to do is that I'm going to arrest you, and I'm going to put you through the process and through the system, and I'm going to gain as much evidence as I can to do that, because you've tried to have me over. So and a lot of people, you kind of keep a watch of and follow up to make sure that they're kind of okay now. On a lot of occasions, sometimes you can't, because you don't have the time, you don't have the available resources to do it. But on some occasions, you can make sure that individual is leading what is a kind of lawfully able life, and that they're actually the better off for it at the same time.
What was it like being with the London Metropolitan Police, the force that many around the world had since 19th century modeled themselves on? And I guess it goes back to former Prime Minister Robert Peel, and the cops were originally called Bobbies, and how he was deemed the father of modern British policing. I mean, so what was it like being with such an esteemed police force globally?
Life changing. I can only place it that way. It enabled me to fully open my what was kind of, I don't know, I was still a man,
and the resources and the talent, and then you were around.
Yeah, it was life changing in that it allowed me to then re-educate myself, as well as the communication part, the negotiate, because you learn how to communicate properly, negotiate properly. When I was doing the other stuff, the security stuff, and policing is securitization anyway, no matter what anybody says. When I was doing ground level security work, you're not kind of engaged in the process of learning legislation. You learn basic requirements. The school that I went to in the north of England wasn't exactly known for its academic prowess. Okay. So I was never going to arise out of there as some type of Stephen Hawking, because it didn't allow for that. I was reasonably bright growing up, and I got the offer as a very, very young kid to go to, somebody had identified me in this primary school, to go to a boarding school. But me being me at the time, I didn't want to do any of that, and my parents were kind of parents that just kind of let their kids do as they will. So as a result, I went to the local comprehensive, or whatever they called it at the time, local secondary school, and didn't learn too much. A lot of drinking, a lot of girls, and a lot of kind of outside work. I wouldn't be at school, essentially. But I managed to pick up enough GCSEs, I flew by. And as a result of that, That's kind of some of the passing marks and criteria to have a lot of the jobs that I've had.
Now, this was post O levels.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, correct. The O levels and GCSEs are kind of mixed up at some point. So that allowed for that, and as a result of it, I then obviously applied and was successfully. I was reasonably fit, because you can't not be when you're a security individual and a bouncer at that. And as a result, joining the police service then allowed me to open up my synapses and to exercise mentally as well, to learn law. And when I say learn law, I mean really learn it, because you've got to practitioner. You're a law enforcement practitioner in the UK, as well as the community-based element of it. And as a result, you need to know inside out criminal legislation, a whole load of civil legislation as well, statutes, case law, etc. So it then opened the world for me to kind of just completely learn that sphere. I'd always had an interest in law anyway. And it allowed me then to increase my grammar, my vocabulary, to be able to speak English properly. I was from the north of England, so, even now it comes through, but my accent was very, very deep. You wouldn't understand a word I was saying, AJ. It was extremely, extremely deep.
Well, the South is its own world. London is its.
It is. But even so, it was my accent was very deep. So it allowed me to do that, and it kind of completely opened up for me that gateway, and it allowed me as well, because of the experience that I was getting, the practicing that I was doing, and everything else. It then allowed me to be able to kind of educate myself as well. It got me interested back in education. So, I did a load of obvious professional certifications, but I also, towards the end of my career, got my master's degree as well in international security and international relations, geopolitics, etc. So it allowed for that, as well as all the financial investigation part of things, which again was an additional toolbox. And that toolbox is a very deep one, vastly consumed by case law as well. So you've got to know that, and you get to know all the lawyers and the silks on the scene, the QCs, Queen's Counsel, or King's Counsel as they are now. And you really get in depth, and it taught me how to write as well. Really, before I had a vague understanding of how to write for what purpose, but being in the police service, you've got to write everything down. So it taught me a great deal of how to write, what a good report looks like, what a good statement looks like, what a good narrative looks like, etc., etc. So it really did transform me as an individual, kind of, and give me a foundation as to where I'm at today, and a want and a thirst and a desire to be more. Because the police force in London, the Metropolitan Police Service, yes, it's got an extremely rich history. But the thing is, it's a juggernaut, okay? It never stops. That train never, ever, ever stops, because of the nature of the vast volume, depth, and sophistication of criminality that goes on within London, Greater London, and nationwide and international, because a lot of the international criminal fraternity will obviously turn to London as one of its bases for either transactions, for an end product such as cocaine or otherwise, and for real estate investments and a load of other investments as well. So London becomes a very, very hot pot of crime globally. So as well as being, the kind of first real formed police force, it also has all those facets to it at the same time. So you're never not busy. I mean, even as a young detective constable in the CID office, I was rolling with 30 crimes kind of a day, and then some bigger cases that I'd keep over that I'd then be doing proactive operations on, covert operations, at the same time as running kind of like, say, this caseload of 30 and then 30 and then 30 each day. Because you'd look at some crimes, you'd screen some out, some are completely, you might have been a Nigerian 419 scam or something that it never had any end of it. So you've got to be, like say, pragmatic and realistic about the chances of an operations of being able to solve one of those as it was then. And then you've got your stabbings, your shootings, your domestic assaults, of which form a great amount within the United Kingdom. And then a lot of frauds and a lot of, so essentially there's a lot of crime, rapes, overnight cases. I frequently be on overnight CID as well, which you deal with anything whatsoever. And a lot of the crime in the borough that I first started on as a CID officer, it was a central London borough, and as a result, you'd be dealing with everything and anything. And obviously, at one point, we had the 2005 terrorist attacks as well. So we had those, and we also had the riots in 2011 as well, which were very, very large. Half of Croydon was ignited in a lot of places. So yeah, there's a lot that you do.
I think it's incredible that you learn skills at the Met that you applied later on in life as a business professional in terms of what you do right now. In the time we've got left, any closing remarks you'd like to make?
Moving on past law enforcement and opening my consultancy, everything was based on that foundation. Not in terms of kind of like, say, the law enforcement piece, but the assisting organizations and people in different cultures in different places, because then I wanted to expand my cultural repertoire as well and understand what makes people tick, or globally. I dealt with such a vast multicultural environment in London, but I wanted to know what it was like in different places, whether it be, kind of working out in Jamaica and the Caribbean, Haiti, and going over to Miami, and then over here in the United Arab Emirates, and leading and teaching and training people that have now gone on to be leading the Ministry of the Interior and on to leading parts of the Abu Dhabi Police Service and otherwise, and over in Dubai assisting corporates and businesses, but still with that protection mindset, that securitization mindset, because within that I also turned to that security background that I'd had, what that looks like, what a motivator that is for the world. The first rule is in the UAE, for example, is trade, and then on top of trade, to trade, you need security. It's the overarching mechanism that assists trade to do what it needs to do, and for people to feel comforted when they are doing deals or to moving products or to facilitating a payment. That security mechanism is always there.
That is so true. They invest so much in security, and the Sheikh takes law and order very seriously. He doesn't want, for example, with the current India-Pakistan situation, he doesn't want people bringing their old world prejudices and hate infecting his society.
No, exactly, AJ, and that's a key component to everything. It's having that big holistic view, and that to me is what kind of security, protection, community-based law enforcement, whatever it may be, is all about. It's having that big holistic look at things, that picture, that bigger global world picture, and that's what got me into kind of doing the geopolitics piece with both Interpol and the United Nations, and then doing the greater securitization with Hill and Associates, and then on to Thomson Reuters, and then back where I am now, which is in the Middle East, which is to help and assist and to kind of do that do that piece where I now have a composite understanding of running large business units and entities at multi-million dollar levels, as well as having base understanding of what it's like to have absolutely nothing. It assists and helps because then we know what can happen if socioeconomics doesn't work, if there's no level with it. And this falls back to kind of the compliance and the regulatory industry, is that they have got a key part to play in this, is that if you have too many regulations, you are going to cripple your society. The economy is going to dry up. And as a result of that, you will then have security problems. You'll have violence. You'll have people out of work. You'll have individuals that have to make that wrong choice in life because there is now no longer any right choice. And law enforcement itself will then start to kind of crumble because there's nothing left, and we see that in countries that have become failed countries quite often. Unfortunately, those lessons haven't been learned repeatedly by countries that are currently in a favorable position globally, is that they haven't looked at those lessons of failure and kind of absorbed them. Luckily enough, here in the UAE, they've got a really strong vision. They've got strong law enforcement. They've got strong businesses. And they've got, above all else, a love, want, and desire to make sure that society is embraced and invigorated and is innovative. And it's the countries that don't have that vision and a very short-term myopic view on things that'll end up in a situation where you have, kind of low securitization, security actors who are consistently fighting the battle, regulators who then try to, again, over-regulate everything, and that collapse in society. So the securitization piece has taught me a lot about things, and the Metropolitan Police Service enabled me to be the person that I am today as a foundation.
Well, kudos to yourself for coming up in the world despite the challenges you faced early on, and also kudos to Dubai and the UAE writ large for maintaining their identity, yet keeping an eye on the future and progressing forward. Mark Nuttall, thank you so much for your time.
Been an absolute pleasure, AJ. Thank you so much, and thank you to Hong Kong University FinTech as well for assisting us.
And to our listeners, thank you. Until next time.